So I'm going to talk to you about Planned Parenthood, talk about its past, its present, and its hopefully non-existent future. And of course, Planned Parenthood is very timely. I'm not going to get into a lot of the specific issues that are very relevant to Planned Parenthood because there's other people more qualified to do that, lawyers and legislators and so forth. But of course, we've had, in Massachusetts, we've had controversy over clinic regulation as far as clinic access, whether or not you guys can be in front of clinics, talking to people who are going in, and how, whether or not your free speech rights have been protected. And so there's a lot of really relevant issues. I'm going to drill down and look at what is the beast itself. And of course, when I talk about Planned Parenthood will apply to a lot of other abortion clinics. But as we'll see, Planned Parenthood is really the #1 bad guy when it comes to running abortion in this country. Planned Parenthood is really Abortion Inc. And so to get you to understand how it got that way, what's behind it, that's what I will be doing today. So Planned Parenthood's image, it's really interesting to me. Pro-lifers just get it. It's like in their mother's milk or something. They know Planned Parenthood is bad news. They might not even be able to really tell you why. They just know Planned Parenthood is bad news. Everybody else, it's the complete opposite. It's like black and white. So for everybody else, this is Planned Parenthood. Pink signs, women's health and freedom. How can you be against women's health and freedom? Right? Nobody wants to be against that. Multicultural, literature there, look at all of those happy people, happy children even. This is what people think Planned Parenthood really is, and Planned Parenthood's pretty successful in cultivating this image. However, there is a reality, and it has to do with that woman there, with Margaret Sanger. Those are her dates, so she always fudged the last one a little bit. It is important to know Margaret Sanger died well before Roe v. Wade. She didn't really talk much about abortion. So when I talk about Margaret Sanger, I'm going to be talking a lot about her views on contraception. It is also helpful to know that while Sanger made public statements making her sound as though she didn't agree with abortion, in fact, privately, both in her correspondence and also in her actions, it was very clear that she did not have a moral problem with abortion. So you don't want to get confused and say Sanger was actually somehow pro-life or something. But I just want you to know the reason I won't be talking a lot about her opinions on abortion is that we don't have a lot of that written. Sanger was one of 11 children, which is always an interesting fact to know. And as I'm going to show you in more detail, Sanger was a eugenicist. So what does that mean? Eugenicists are people who divide the world up into groups of those with good genes and those with bad genes. Eugenicists want to limit the reproduction of people whom they think have bad genes. And for Sanger, she thought you did this through birth control. It's this reductive mentality that reduces a person to a set of good or bad genes that really identifies this eugenic worldview. The people who have supposedly bad genes are the quote-unquote unfit. This is the eugenics' own language. So who were they? Well, everybody disagreed on the exact makeup of the category, but all eugenicists pretty much agreed on the following, that they were the poor, the physically disabled, and those with cognitive or mental disabilities. Those were the unfit. So what did Sanger want to do when it came to the unfit? What was her goal in founding what later came to be called Planned Parenthood? She said in 1920 that her work was nothing more or less than the facilitation of the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives or of those who will become defectives. The great thing about Sanger, she never hid. You never had to say, like, what did Sanger really think? She was very happy to sell, with exclamation points and underlining exactly what she thought about the rest of us, and it was usually not pretty. So it's very easy to find out exactly what Sanger thought about eugenics. Well, what happens if the supposedly unfit don't want to limit their reproduction? What if they persist in this, antiquated idea that they have the right to have children just like anybody else? Well, then maybe the state's going to have to step in. So Sanger said, possibly drastic and Spartan methods may be forced upon society if it continues complacently to encourage the chance and chaotic breeding that has resulted from our stupidly cruel sentimentalism. So you need to understand, it's quite a mouthful, you need to understand that what she means by sentimentalism. This was a kind of abbreviation for charity to assist the supposedly unfit and thus to make it easier for them to, stay alive and reproduce themselves. And eugenicists did not like charitable assistance going to the poor because it just encouraged them, right? What she especially hated was charitable assistance going to help poor women in crisis pregnancy situations, what we would call crisis pregnancy situations. So things like, pregnancy help centers, homes for unwed mothers, those kinds of things she thought were especially dangerous. It was just this sort of sentimental help that encouraged exactly the wrong kind of people, according to Margaret Sanger, to reproduce. So what's going to happen if the state needs to step in? Governments should attempt to restrain, either by force or by persuasion, the moron and the imbecile from producing his large family of feeble-minded offspring. I always kind of feel like I'm in the playground, throwing out these 6th grade or younger taunts, moron, imbecile. The truth is that all of these idiot, feeble-minded, all this stuff, these were actually considered technical scientific terms. And they referred to kind of particular notches on the IQ scale. Moron and imbecile were pretty low. Feeble-minded, those were considered especially dangerous because those are like almost normal. So you might actually think they were normal, and you might actually treat them like they were normal, and then they reproduce, and their genes pollute the bloodstream and so forth. So this is classic eugenic language. What a lot of people don't realize is that here in America, we had a very robust campaign for forced sterilization. This is not a chapter in our history that is old enough, so I talk about it whenever I can. We had what I call the Roe v. Wade of the 20s, which is the Buck v. Bell decision, in which Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And so the Buck in the case was Carrie Buck, and there's a picture of her there on the left. And Bell was a representative from the state of Virginia, if memory serves, who was trying to forcibly or coercively sterilize Carrie Buck. And this was for eugenic reasons. Well, by an 8-1 decision, the Supreme Court came down in favor of forced or coerced sterilization. So now, for the first time, states could sterilize their citizens without their consent, sometimes even without their knowledge. And most of the people who suffered under this were people in institutions, as Carrie Buck was. Some of them didn't realize that they were sterilized. They were, they were told they had to get an appendicitis or something like that. They went in to get an operation, and years later, when they couldn't figure out why they couldn't have children, it took, medical intervention. It took some doctor who had to inform them that, that they had been sterilized many years before. Between 1927 and all the way into the 1960s, all the best estimates indicate that we had over 60,000 Americans who were sterilized here. One of my friends saw, I never was able to see it, but one of my friends saw a documentary on Carrie Buck, and she said it was very interesting. It was on the whole issue of forced sterilization. And the documentary was very taken by the fact that actually, by all objective accounts, Carrie Buck was probably of normal intelligence. She was probably the victim of incest and was sent away into an institution to kind of cover things up, came from a poor family and so forth. And the documentary kept emphasizing the fact that, she wasn't, feeble-minded or an imbecile. And my friend kept waiting for, the voiceover to say, but even if she were, we still don't go around sterilizing people just because we think they're not smart enough. But it was interesting that it could never quite bring itself to say that, which I think says a lot about the residual eugenic beliefs that are still in existence right now. So what did Margaret Sanger think about all of this? Sanger supported it, as you might not be surprised. She said, "It now remains for the United States government to set a sensible example to the world by offering a bonus or a yearly pension to all obviously unfit parents who allow themselves to be sterilized by harmless and scientific means. In this way, the moron and the diseased would have no posterity to inherit their unhappy condition. Ask the government to first take off the burden of the insane and feeble-minded from your backs. Sterilization for these is the remedy." By the way, if you are interested in any of these quotes, they're all on my website, which is there on the slide, so you don't have to try to madly write them down or whatever. And just a side note on Sanger, there is a lot of stuff out there in the blogosphere and the webosphere on Sanger, including a lot of stuff written by pro-lifers. I do not find all of it to be reliable, so do be sure anytime you're looking at what's supposedly a quote from Sanger, make sure it's referenced, that there's a reference right there, and do be sure that you're keeping your facts straight. How do you get to this point where you can say sterilization for people whom you don't like and you think aren't smart enough is somehow the remedy to social problems? Well, you get there by being willing to dehumanize the people you don't like, or the people you find inconvenient. And this should sound familiar to us in the pro-life movement, right? So here is Sanger. She's talking about Mr. H.G. Wells. There's a picture of him there. In his last book, Mr. H.G. Wells speaks of the meaningless, aimless lives which cram this world of ours. Hordes of people who are born, who live, who die, yet have done absolutely nothing to advance the race one iota. Their lives are hopeless repetitions. All that they have said has been said before. All that they have done has been done better before. Such human weeds clog up the path, drain up the energies and the resources of this little earth. We must clear the way for a better world. We must cultivate our garden. Yikes. One of the really chilling things I think about this, there's lots of chilling things about this quote, but one of the most unsettling things is if you look at it, she's not even talking about the so-called hard cases, the situations when we really have to convince people that we're dealing with somebody who has meaning and everything. The things where people say, oh, but, it's somebody in a persistent vegetative state and I don't understand. She's talking about ordinary people who are going around, paying taxes, working hard, raising their kids, living their ordinary lives, and she looks at it and instead of seeing like the salt of the earth that's propping up society and making everything function, she says, human weeds, clear them away, because they're not living her Margaret Sanger glamorous life with, all the lovers, including H.G. Wells, by the way. She looks at their lives and say, meaningless, right? Well, that's the eugenic worldview. It is an elitist worldview. And that's precisely what we're dealing with when it comes to Margaret Sanger. There's another layer here beyond the eugenics, and that layer is her vision of women and of female fertility and reproduction. That's why the subtitle of my book is my book on Margaret Sanger, The Control of Female Fertility, because for her, female fertility is really the problem. And I think it's really helpful when I talk about this side of Sanger's ideology, I really like to give people an opportunity to sort of step back and realize how radical this is. Because frankly, it sounds like stuff we hear every day. It's the sort of thing that's in an op-ed column in a newspaper somewhere in America probably every day, right? It's become so normal to us, but it's not normal, and we shouldn't think it's normal. This should strike us as weird and dangerous. So let's pay attention to what it is Sanger's saying. She's really one of the first people to articulate it this way, and she's definitely the person who's most responsible, I think, in mainstreaming and normalizing this kind of worldview. So Sanger says in her book, Woman in the New Race, the most far-reaching social development of modern times is the revolt of women against sex servitude. Well, I don't know about you, but I think sex servitude sounds bad. I do not consider myself pro-sex servitude, right? She's tossing out something. I think most people would be like, okay, let's revolt against that. Sounds good. But what does she mean by sex servitude? Let's see. Woman has chained herself to her place in society and the family. How? Through the maternal functions of her nature. And only chains thus strong could have bound her to her lot as a brood animal for the masculine civilizations of the world. Okay, so there it comes out, and Sanger will continue to develop. What is sex servitude? Sex servitude is the servitude of a woman to her own body, to her own fertility. Okay, she looks at female fertility and sees something that enslaves women. Again, this is now like common coin, right? You find it everywhere. But this is weird, right? If you think about it, Sanger wrote this in 1922. There was a lot of foment, a lot of activity going on when it came to women's rights in the 19-teens and 20s, right? What do we call that movement? The suffragettes movement, right? So there are women out there who are carrying signs, trying to get women to vote, and they're thinking about a lot of other things. They're thinking about education, they're thinking about property rights, there's a lot of activity and thought going into this. And Sanger looked at all of that, and she said, superficial. None of that stuff is going to solve the problem of none of that's going to liberate women. Why? Because women are not held down by social problems, by not having rights and so forth. Women are held down, according to Margaret Sanger, by their own bodies. And until you liberate them from their bodies, they will not be free. I would contend that this is a very dangerous perspective for feminism and for any sort of thinking about women. Because once we start to tell women that, lady, your problem is you and your body, then we are suddenly stepping back from any of the very real problems that women might have, and we're not dealing with them at all. And all we're trying to do is make women not fertile. And I don't think that really solves any problems. But Sanger did. And so, in fact, she thought it solved not only her personal problems, but she thought it solved societal problems as a whole. So, talking from the same book again, within woman, is wrapped up the future of the race. It is hers to make or mar. Well, how is it hers to make or mar? It is woman's duty, as well as her privilege, to lay hold of the means of freedom. Whatever men may do, she cannot escape the responsibility. Well, what is the means of freedom? Well, the means of freedom for Margaret Sanger is contraception. Of course, for Planned Parenthood, that would be, also abortion. Why? Because the problem is the female body, so the solution is to neutralize female fertility. End of problem. And for Sanger, and also for Planned Parenthood now, this not only solves her problems, this solves societal problems, because all of these problems go back to eugenics and the wrong people having too many kids, and you get rid of all of that stuff. If women would only face up to their duty to control their fertility, then everything's going to go smoothly. What you're starting to get here is a tremendous amount of pressure being put on women, right? That now everything is the cause of all of these social problems, and in the books, Sanger ties it to overpopulation, and all of that goes back to the woman's womb, right? And so women start to become big old scapegoats when it comes to world historical problems. So what is Sanger's ideology? She has a naive belief in the promiscuous lifestyle. She really did think that makes you happy. Now we have lots of evidence to the contrary. But if you're going to live that way, you have to avoid pregnancy. And so we get, as a result, 3 kinds of control. This is what ties Sanger's ideology together, this need to control. You've got birth control, which was a term that she popularized. It wasn't used all that much before her. Birth control for the purpose of eugenic control, which would then spill over to population control. Population control was eugenics with a passport. The same people, everybody knows that this is not controversial in eugenic historiography at all. The same people who are promoting the eugenics movement were promoting the population control movement in the teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Exact same people. So that is her ideology. So I talk more about that in this book, which I have a few copies of outside, and I also have another book that's not directly on this topic, where I touch on some of this stuff, so I'd be happy to sign copies after the talk. But what I want to talk about now is more about Planned Parenthood today. Now, I am not of the belief, I am not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think that Planned Parenthood workers sit around after hours and, read eugenic works and, think dark thoughts about the unfit. I just don't believe it. I think that, they're the kind of people that you bump into every day who are pro-abortion and have bought into this idea that women are oppressed by their fertility, and they genuinely think most of the time that they're helping people, and so forth and so on. Yeah. However, just because I don't think they're explicitly eugenicists, I do think this eugenic ideology, especially this idea that women's fertility is like the cause of all problems everywhere, has seeped into the very, bloodstream of Planned Parenthood, and you cannot yank it out. And it is just there, even if people who are involved with Planned Parenthood don't really realize you know, that what they're thinking and promoting has this history. So there's Planned Parenthood's image again, right? Women's health. Who could be against women's health, right? How retrograde. But what are they actually for? So Planned Parenthood actually is promoting a lifestyle. You might not be surprised. It is the Margaret Sanger lifestyle. There's a flyer. This was a fundraiser a few years ago for the New York City Planned Parenthood at the Museum of Sex. Did not know there was such a thing. Somehow managed to miss that. You could win a whole dancing lesson, except the fundraiser's over, so I'm sorry. You missed your chance. But that's definitely, I mean, like, they're kind of unabashed. Like, this is still what they do, and this is their lifestyle. That the lifestyle that they're promoting. And they get away with this to some degree because they promote themselves as being the experts when it comes to sex. Now, this is the kind of thing you find all the time, right? That Planned Parenthood gives you medically accurate and age-appropriate sexuality information for youth, right? I mean, again, how can you be against, you know, something that's age-appropriate? How can you be against information, right? They're always trying to set themselves up in this unassailable position where if you are there opposing them, you look like some sort of, you know, anti-scientific Neanderthal or something. However, this is the Trojan horse. Won't be my last condom joke either. This is a Trojan horse for what they're really trying to do, which is to get into the schools, right? They are trying to get into the schools to promote their vision, their lifestyle, and they often do this through this idea that they're going to be in there preventing teen pregnancy. In fact, there are no studies that have even been commissioned, to my knowledge, but certainly no studies that demonstrate that Planned Parenthood's programs have caused any reduction in teen pregnancy anywhere where they've been introduced. You'd think they would want to, like, commission a study for that. For some reason they don't. Also this idea that they're preventing disease, which is something we will talk about. This is sometimes called, just so you know, abstinence first education. This is what I call, they talk about abstinence first and everything else very shortly after, which is really what it is. So this is their pitch. This is what they're trying to convince people of. I love this quote because I think it's just so typical of Planned Parenthood. This was a UN event from a few years ago. So International Planned Parenthood Federation is out there doing all of this UN stuff as well as the various Planned Parenthood, the other Planned Parenthood affiliates. And somebody asked what I would think would be a fairly simple yes or no question. Does International Planned Parenthood Federation sex ed in the developing world include abstinence? Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. You know, kind of waiting for the one-word answer there. This was the answer. Abstinence is not 100% effective in preventing pregnancy. Whoa. I'm not a sex expert, so, you know, what do I know? So we would only recommend abstinence with condoms. Wow. I don't even know what that looks like. And then the other thing that I'm left thinking is, how did I not get pregnant all those years? Abstinence isn't effective. Oh my goodness. So these are the people who want to be in there teaching your children, right? Like, we're supposed to expect that this is like the height of scientific reliability here. Now, it is very important to realize that as they're in there promoting abstinence with condoms, that there's a real myth about the effectiveness of condoms in preventing these kinds of diseases. You know, back when I was, you know, enduring a high school health class and everything, they talked about safe sex. These days, they tend to say more safer sex because they really got called on the fact that you cannot call that safe sex. I mean, not even close. Like, there really is no such thing. If you're talking about non-monogamous sexual activity, you can't ever call it safe. So they do kind of call it safer sex, but even then, the benefits of condoms are generally greatly oversold. One thing to note is that condoms are, this is, by the way, the CDC, not me talking, condoms are considered simply not effective against some diseases such as HPV and herpes. The ugly, ugly truth of the matter is that there are some diseases that are transmitted through skin-to-skin contact. Yikes! You don't even have to have intercourse. Unless you're talking about completely wrapping both partners in latex, which is not very sexy. You cannot prevent against those kinds of diseases if people are engaging in sexual activity. And so certainly condoms are not going to help. So again, that's the CDC. to understand what Planned Parenthood is doing, you've got to understand that for them, pregnancy is the only real sexually transmitted infection. That is the only thing they really care about. And they know that if girls are out there, engaging in sexual activity and, guys are using condoms, if they get pregnant, they know they can still take care of the pregnancy, right? Because there's abortion, okay? So they're not really deeply concerned with preventing the other forms of sexually transmitted infections. And there's this kind of idea that they have that as long as we talk at people long enough, somehow we'll convince them to use the condoms. And as we'll look at, that's not very, doesn't work very well. What they don't talk about very much at all are these spiritual effects of this lifestyle. So, it's the way this stuff is presented is sort of this grand values clarification kind of schema that, we're going to tell you, all your options and you get to decide, lowly ninth grader, whether or not having sex is a good choice for you. Okay, the problem with this is, does anybody have an adolescent, know an adolescent, or been an adolescent? Okay, me too. Okay, so adolescents, it turns out, are not very good at certain things like long-range planning, like understanding the effects that their actions are going to have. They tend to engage in what's called magical thinking. Like, it happens to everybody else, it'll never happen to me. All of this kind of stuff typifies adolescent cognitive processing. We just simply know this. And we know who are fabulous users of contraception. They are like 30-something married women. They take the pill on time every morning. They do all the stuff they're supposed to do, and their user failure rate is very, very low. Adolescents do none of these things. And in fact, they never will act like 30-something married women, because they're not. They're adolescents. And to ask them, to expect them to engage in behaviors that only 30-something married women do well, as adolescents, is really a lot of naivete, right? Because they simply won't. And so when you're accused of being naive for expecting kids to be abstinent, believe me, it is far more naive to expect them to use condoms well all the time. It is far more naive because we know from their cognitive, we know that they don't, in fact, and we know that it's not a matter that they just haven't been talked to enough. It's because they just don't function that way. So what happens? They engage, they're told that this is just a grand scheme of values clarification. They decide, okay, well maybe I should do this or not. What they're not told is, if you engage in this kind of behavior, there are some very likely effects that are going to happen. This kind of information gets in the way of the lifestyle. So, one of the things that Planned Parenthood tells them, that these are articles directed towards adolescents on the Planned Parenthood website, serious long-term emotional problems after abortion are rare. Wow, that's an interesting statement. It's especially interesting because the one cohort for whom we have very solid data on post-abortive troubles are adolescents. We're getting more and more data all the time, but adolescents we've had like really, really good studies for, about a decade. Here's one of them. So we've got 3 columns there. The first one are girls who have never been pregnant. The second are ones who are pregnant and carried their child to term. And the third are ones who've had an abortion. So depression. A little over 30% of all girls who've never been pregnant are likely to be depressed. Slightly higher if they've been pregnant and carried the child. Nearly 80% of post-abortive adolescent girls are depressed. Now, to my mind, depression is a serious effect, and that's hardly rare. In fact, if you're not depressed after an abortion, there's something, you're the odd one out, right? You're the unusual case. Anxiety. Nearly 40% of all girls, slightly lower for people who've carried their child to term. I think that statistic's kind of interesting. It's like, well, how much worse can it get? I may get worried about this, but I've had bigger problems. About 65 or so percent, however, of girls who've had an abortion suffer from anxiety. And then look at suicidal thoughts. A little over 20% for all girls, slightly higher for girls who carry their child to term. Fully 50% of all girls who've had abortions are having suicidal ideation, meaning they're real suicide risks. Okay? This was a very serious study that came out, I'll just quickly give you all the stuff, in 2006. Very, well done study and everything. The great thing about this study is that the author is like publicly pro-abortion. He got a lot of flack for this and really stood his ground because he said, this is not ideological, this is just what the data shows. We know that not only abortion, but also teen sex leads to depression. This is not something that Planned Parenthood is going to tell your high school students. Sexually active girls are more than 3 times more likely to be depressed. Sexually active boys more than 2 times likely than those who are chaste. Sexually active girls nearly 3 times more likely to attempt suicide. And sexually active boys 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than boys who are chaste. That's from a meta-analysis at the Heritage Foundation. But there's lots of good people out there working at abstinence curricula who are, always crunching these numbers. This is just, we know that teenage sexual activity is a public health disaster. We know it leads to all kinds of problems. Planned Parenthood is still out there promoting this lifestyle as though everything is just fine. But sometimes you hear people, and I think this is sometimes well-meaning, it's the Nancy Pelosi line, but it's not always, I think, coming from that perspective. Some people really do think, well, if we only let Planned Parenthood get in there, give the birth control to the kids and everything, at least we would have less abortion. For the people who are going to have sex anyway, isn't it better that those kids use contraception so that, then at least they won't get pregnant and have to have abortions? Well, in fact, what we know is that is not the case. Again, I've talked about the adolescent psychology. So what does this mean? This means that kids engage in sexual activity when they've been told that there's this promise that they're not going to get pregnant. Right? Here's your birth control. You can do this and you don't have to get pregnant. So they're entering into the activity with a certain kind of sense of assurance that they're not going to suffer bad effects from it. They're not going to get pregnant, right? Okay, what happens if you're in that mindset and you do get pregnant? What happens if you forgot to take your pill, or if you didn't use the condom correctly, or if it just, was method failure, which happens? What is your attitude going to be like if you've gone into this act thinking, I made a bargain, right? Sex and no pregnancy, that's the bargain. How psychologically ready are you to face what might actually happen, that you might actually get pregnant? You're not psychologically prepared at all, right? You're expecting the exact opposite. And so when you get people in that situation, it is why all the studies point to the fact that actually adolescent contraceptive use is correlated with more abortions and not with fewer. Because you have more of them engaging in the activity that leads to pregnancy. They're not, they're never going to be especially likely to use contraception. Well, if you have more kids having sex, you're going to have more kids getting into crisis pregnancies, period. And so that's why you end up getting more abortions. And well, Planned Parenthood doesn't seem to be all that unhappy to help people out with that. So Planned Parenthood is the nation's largest abortion chain. We've got the 2003 numbers fairly recently. For one of the first times ever, the numbers have started to go down a bit, which is interesting. For the longest time, you can see that between 1998 and 2009, for example, where the numbers, basically doubled. During that time period, the nation's abortion rate was either going down or leveling out. So Planned Parenthood has been gobbling up more and more and more market share to the point where they are far and away, no competitors basically, the nation's largest abortion chain. They will always say, but abortion is just one thing we do. We do so many other things. Well, if you look at the other things they do around pregnancy, it's kind of interesting. They don't provide infertility treatments, right? They have a very spotty and unimpressive record when it comes to adoption referrals. They, of course, do not do any adoptions in-house. They would refer you out to an agency. How much money do they make from all this? We don't know for sure because they don't release those numbers. But if we take the average cost of a first trimester abortion and multiply it by how many they've done, we're looking at over $170 million of clinic revenue from abortions. And this is about 1/3 of all of their clinic revenue, period. So you'll hear them say, abortion's only 5% or 8% of what we do. And they'll get to that by they'll take all their quote-unquote services and add them up. So you've got a woman who comes in for an abortion, they give her a pregnancy test, they give her Planned Parenthood condoms, which leak, by the way. That's the Consumer Reports, not me. They'll give her maybe a morning after pill, blah-de-dee-blah, sexually transmitted infection screening, and they'll give her an abortion. Right? So you've got like 5 services, only one of them was an abortion, right? But it's all centered around that primary job of getting that woman an abortion. And in fact, that's how they basically make their money. So 56% of their non-government income in their clinics comes from abortion. In other words, over half of the money that they make is due to abortion. This is happening even though there's this overall trend that there are fewer and fewer clinics, which is not what they wanted, by the way. They wanted to have more and more clinics. So by 2013, only 730 clinics. But we're getting to nearly half of those are doing abortions, which used to be more like a tenth of them. And a lot of that is the RE46 abortion pill. So more and more of the abortion clinics are offering chemical abortions only. So they don't have to have a doctor on staff. Just a couple of things to talk about, and I'm only going to scratch the surface here, but as far as the general undesirability of what goes on in a Planned Parenthood clinic, other than the abortions, I always think it's really, really important to focus on the kind of stuff that you can get agreement on across a wide range of, across the political spectrum. In fact, most people don't like abortion. They think it's icky. They want to think of Planned Parenthood as that bright pink protects women's health kind of thing. That's why Planned Parenthood very rarely uses the word abortion. If you pound home the fact that when you're giving money to Planned Parenthood, you're not giving money to women's health, but to Abortion Inc., then that, there's a lot of people who recoil from that, even if they vote, Democrat reliably and, consider themselves pro-choice. Another thing that people find very distasteful is the fact that there is no good evidence, and there's lots of evidence to the contrary, that Planned Parenthood is concerned about child sexual activity, and that means sexual activity in very kind of undesirable circumstances. Teen pregnancies are often the result of statutory rape. I used to say the majority of them were from statutory rape. Unfortunately, the studies that we have date back to the 80s, so I feel like I can't say that in good conscience, but all the studies that we have talk about like 55 to 65% of teen pregnancies being the result not of, 2 high school sophomores in the backseat of a car, but an adult man and an underage girl. And if this is the case, then Planned Parenthood really should be reporting a lot of possible cases because they are a mandated reporter as a health clinic. But we have no evidence that the organization is actually doing this. So Lila Rose came to speak for Mass Citizens back in the fall, and her outfit, Live Action, has done a lot of work exposing the fact that when people go in presenting a scenario of statutory rape and really extravagant, like they've said, I'm 14 and my boyfriend is 29, it's like the kind of things you would think they would say, okay, honey, let's talk about this relationship. Why are you doing this? How can we help you? Instead it's like, don't tell me his age. I didn't hear it. I don't want to know. Put down on the paper that he's 15. There's no concern at all, and in fact, direct enabling of these kinds of relationships. So that's really important to communicate to people. So what kinds of things can you do? I think it's really important to educate people about Planned Parenthood's abortion advocacy. Again, abortion is icky. Educate about Margaret Sanger and eugenics. I'd be happy to answer some questions about the precise issue of racism. I don't think it's very helpful to call her a racist because the evidence there is very ambiguous at best. Stick with what you know. She is definitely a eugenicist. They can't deny it. So talk about that to people. Educate about how Planned Parenthood is promoting undesirable child sexual activity. Raise questions about whether or not Planned Parenthood is reporting child sex abuse. And go after the funding. I use the example of my Walla Walla, Washington example, partly because I like to say Walla Walla, Washington. Also because it's very helpful. There is a Planned Parenthood in Walla Walla, Washington there's this burgeoning winery industry there. And Planned Parenthood had such a Planned Parenthood kind of fundraising, and you go from winery to winery, you drink the wine and eat the cheese, and the money went to Planned Parenthood. It was so sophisticated. And I said to them, the people in Walla Walla, Washington, go talk to these vineyard owners. They're probably not die-hard pro-abortion radicals. Maybe they are, but maybe they're not. Educate them. Talk to them. say, I'd love to support your industry, but I can't if I feel like you're supporting this, Do those kinds of things where people just feel like Planned Parenthood is too hot. I don't want to support it. I'll write my check to the Sierra Club instead, right? Convince people not to support this organization. And then provide the life-giving alternatives that we pro-lifers do so well. This is an older button from Planned Parenthood's history. I don't know if they're this out front more as much as they used to be. The fewer the merrier. In contrast, of course, the real understanding of children is that they're a gift from the Lord and that they're a reward from Him. I always want to reinforce the fact that, we're fighting Goliath, right? But let's not forget that David won, right? And you win by being in contact with other like-minded people. You win by being involved with organizations like Mass Citizens for Life, right? You win by supporting each other, by praying for each other. You win by giving not only your time, but also your talents, your thought, your energies, your money. Or Planned Parenthood makes its own money. It runs itself, right? It kills babies. That's how it makes money. We don't do that kind of thing, right? We have to really give sacrificially. We have to give till it hurts. So support organizations like MCFL. And just, remember that in the end, the victory is in God's hands, and He's already won. So thank you so much for enduring. But I'd be happy to answer some questions. And will let me? Yeah.
Could you make a comment about the eugenics part of it? It seems today that it's still with us. You have women having amniocentesis at 35 years old, and I've heard somewhere like 90% of Down syndrome babies are aborted. And there seems to be other screening and the possibility of sequencing the human genome. There'll be more screenings coming on. So could you comment a little bit more on where the direction is on the eugenics side of this?
Good. So the question is about eugenics and things like prenatal screening and so forth. There is no doubt that eugenics is alive and well. And in fact, by the 70s and 80s, eugenic groups who had changed their names several times, in order to look less and less eugenic, were basically kind of morphing into prenatal screening kind of organizations. And so, yes, there is no doubt that we have a very eugenic attitude when it comes to disability. And that's just something that really needs to be a conscious focus of our education, where we can help people see things differently, because we just have this bias for the fit. We don't call it that anymore, but that's definitely where it is. And we see it in euthanasia, infanticide. So eugenics is not dead. It just doesn't call itself. Nobody calls themselves a eugenicist anymore, but more and more of us are, in fact. Yes, please.
I just wanted to ask, why is BP say everything is going to be so good for the teen when in fact it's anything but?
When it comes to like teen sexual activity and so forth?
Right.
Okay, so the question is, why does Planned Parenthood, why is it so deceptive when it comes to teen sexual activity? I really think, it really believes this. It really thinks that the sexual revolution is awesome and that unfettered promiscuous sex is like the way to go. I mean, I think Planned Parenthood has really bought into the whole Margaret Sanger line that you just can't be happy unless you have that lifestyle. And so it kind of considers the infections and all of that sort of collateral damage, as far as I can see, because it has to know that the lifestyle leads to disease. I mean, maybe some of them really think that we just haven't yelled at teens enough about condoms, but I think it just is kind of willing to put up with this few infections, if you can promote this lifestyle. Yes?
Is Planned Parenthood legally considered a charity, and if so, how does that make any sense?
Is Planned Parenthood legally considered a charity? Yes, this has been a vexed question among pro-lifers for decades. The big Planned Parenthood entity is a 501c3, meaning it is a charity. It does have a 501c4 of fairly recent vintage and a PAC of even more recent vintage. But Planned Parenthood has for some reason been able to get away with, to my mind, enormous amounts of political of at least lobbying activity, like for a really, really long time, and way more than the percent, certain percentages allowed if you're a 501c3. But I remember it was very telling. We formed an organization to keep Planned Parenthood out of my hometown in West Virginia, which has been successful up till now. Praise God. And I was actually interacting with the Planned Parenthood rep, and he said, "Why are you registered as a 501c4?" And I said, "Well, we wanted to have the option to, be involved with legislation if it came to that." And he said, "You can do so much of that as a 501c3. And I was like, "You can do a lot of it, but you better believe you would sick the feds on us if we tried to get away with that." So, it's one of those perpetual frustrations that I feel as though they've really been allowed to get away with a lot, but will we ever be able to do anything about it? Only if, like, some congressman, gets in some position of power and really fights it, but it's not an easy thing to do.
So if you had a racist organization, KKK, or a pro-war organization, could that be a charity too?
That would be a question for a lawyer, but I probably, so. Yes?
I was just going to mention that not that long ago, there was a big thing about that they were going to be involved with women's breast health, and that the mammograms, they were going to be able to do that. And I talked to people, a lot of young people that thought, "Oh, this is wonderful, because you can go there, you can get a mammogram if you can't afford it.
Yeah.
This is great." Well, they don't do that.
No, they don't do mammograms. So, and this is one of the other things they claim to promote. So they get money from the Common Organization. Everybody probably remembers that Tempest. The breast health stuff that they do is pretty much limited to doing like manual breast examinations. Checking for lumps, the kind of thing that women can do for themselves. To my knowledge, no Planned Parenthood clinic has a mammogram machine now. There might be a handful that do, but this is certainly not. They don't have the machinery as a general rule or the technicians trained to use it. And I haven't heard that they had any serious plans of actually doing that, because that would be fairly expensive, and it's really not their core mission. Their core mission is about, frankly, promoting the sexual revolution and the things that go along with it. So. It's been one of those, like preventing teen pregnancy, and one of those kinds of red herrings to try to convince people that this isn't a fabulous organization.
By any chance, do you know how many of our federal tax dollars Planned Parenthood gets on an annual basis?
Shoot, I should know that number, and I can't remember it from the most recent one. It's enormous. Do you remember?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 400,000 a year.
Oh, a lot more than that.
400
million.
Is it?
400 million.
No, it's not.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I meant million.
Millions, yeah. Yeah, that sounds right, in the neighborhood of like 400 million. It's in the hundreds of millions, and in fact, it keeps going up, unsurprisingly, maybe under the Obama administration. But also, that's government money as a whole, I believe. And so it's very complicated, because you've got federal, state, and local governments all giving to various Planned Parenthood entities. There's the national office, and then there's all of the affiliates. It's actually very hard to track, like, where Planned Parenthood gets all its money, because there's so much. But that's always something to check into. If your local government might be giving teen pregnancy prevention money to a Planned Parenthood, and it's always easier to tackle things at the local level. Now, it depends, if you've got a rabidly leftist, town council or whatever. This is probably not going to work. But depending on your local town, you might be able to defund that and just say, we've got much better alternatives. Where's the data? I just want to see the data that this is working. They haven't presented any data. That's, to my mind, those are battles that are much more winnable than saying we're going to defund, the federal government from Planned Parenthood, though we have been getting traction on, various funding battles across the country, which is good.
Back about 2 or 3 years ago, Planned Parenthood changed the acronym sexually transmitted, STDs, or sexually transmitted diseases, to sexually transmitted infections. I noticed both Linda and yourself use STIs instead of STDs. Why did you do that, and are they really diseases, or are they infections?
Well, my understanding is that it wasn't just Planned Parenthood, that is kind of a broad consensus change, so, like the CDC, and, just kind of like, it is sort of I use it because it's the most recent term, and, to my mind, we're all talking about the same things. I mean, it's related, no doubt, to the fact that venereal disease used to be the common thing, and they changed that because it got a bad name, and then STDs get a bad name. So there's a kind of a sense in which they're, but it doesn't matter. STIs are going to get a bad name too, so it doesn't bother me. But also, I think that it is considered more medically accurate. Is that correct, Linda? Because technically, there's probably some distinction between infection and disease that I'm not aware of.
Cure infection, and you can't cure infection.
You can cure some diseases, sure.
I think it was trying to destigmatize.
Yeah, I think it was just like why they moved away from BD.
I don't think it's
But
it either. But
yeah, it's always helpful, guys, though, use the most recent language, because otherwise then you will get somebody who will be like, this person is so out of date, they don't realize we call them STIs and not STDs. Right? So, like, just go along with it, because it's, you know, you don't need to fight that battle. Yeah.
One thing I noticed about Planned Parenthood is that you talked about mammograms and how they talk about they even send high-level people out in front of TV cameras who say they do mammograms. One thing I've learned about Planned Parenthood, looking at them over time, is they're not beholden to the truth at all. In fact, they are very artful deceivers.
Yes, this is very
They
true.
actually manipulate language to hide truth. It's beyond lying. It's actual intentional deception. It's their modus operandi.
Yeah, so the comment is that Planned Parenthood certainly seems to be engaging in really intentional deception. I'll give you a personal example. So this is back from when we were, fighting the Planned Parenthood coming into our town. I had a radio interview, and I cited the number of abortions that Planned Parenthood had done in the previous year. This is Planned Parenthood's own numbers. This is publicly available data. And the Planned Parenthood rep who was on the radio said, "Oh, I've never heard that. I don't know where she got that information. I don't think that's right." Next question. And I'm like sputtering, right? But like, that it actually could be true. It's very conceivable that I know more about Planned Parenthood than that guy does. That is entirely possible. But it is also like, that's just kind of what you have to expect, especially in these sort of, sound bite kind of settings where they can say something like that, and unless, you've got an interviewer has the data right in front of him, printed off from the website, he's not going to call, he's not going to know, so you do have to be prepared that they fight dirty, that they're not going to be like, "Oh, that is correct, Angela, that is accurate data." So, yes?
We know that there are a lot of Planned Parenthood clinics closing. We know a lot of women are quitting working there, becoming pro-life. And we also know that abortion rates are down, and the youth are more in favor of pro-life. Why are they still getting so much money, and how can they justify it?
Good. So we have all these trends working in our way. Why is Planned Parenthood still making so much money? I don't think it's an accident that more and more of that's coming from the government. So I think it's based of, first of all, it's the clinic services, like they know that's precarious because the abortion numbers are going down. But also I think they're having a harder time fundraising from ordinary people because we are becoming more pro-life. But that's why it's so essential to educate people on Planned Parenthood, because it is astonishing how many people really don't know what Planned Parenthood is all about and are, think that they're just this benign, tax write-off. So. But I think, it comes down to, when it comes to government, it comes down to our responsibility as, civic, as far as our civic engagement. We've got to get in there and elect the right people in the legislative and executive branches, because the executive branch has a huge amount of say when it comes to distributing money, both at the federal and state levels. And then the legislative branches, if you get good pro-life legislators in there who are on the right committees, who really have a passion for this, they can have, we've had investigations of Planned Parenthood, they can lead, they can cut off funding, but it really, we have to be out there electing the right people so that we can get that kind of momentum, because they're not invulnerable, and they know it. I think they're kind of scared, frankly. So on that note, thank you again for your time.